It was the night of September 14th, 2024, in the quiet suburbs outside Denver, Colorado. A storm had rolled in earlier that evening, the kind that makes the streets slick and the air feel charged, as if the whole city is holding its breath. My partner and I were parked at Station 27, finishing paperwork from a long shift, when the call came through. Dispatch voice clipped, urgent. Unresponsive male, possible cardiac arrest, private residence. Immediate response required. In my 26 years as an EMT, I had run thousands of calls like this. Heart attacks, overdoses, trauma, routine emergencies that blur into each other after a while. I had learned to move fast, stay calm, and never let emotions cloud my judgment. The job demands it. You see people at their most vulnerable, on bathroom floors, in wrecked cars, in darkened bedrooms, and your duty is to keep a steady hand no matter the chaos. My name is David Carter. I'm 52 years old, and I've spent more than half my life answering calls in the middle of the night. I thought I had seen everything the streets could throw at me, but nothing about what happened that night fit into the world I thought I understood. When we arrived at the address, the house looked ordinary. A two-story colonial with a flag on the porch and a flickering porch light fighting against the storm. The wife met us at the door, frantic, shouting that her husband had collapsed. She led us upstairs, her hands shaking so badly I thought she might fall on the stairs. We found him in the bedroom, sprawled on the floor beside the bed. No pulse, no breathing, skin pale, lips blue. Standard presentation for cardiac arrest. My partner, Mark, dropped to his knees and began compressions while I set up the airway and prepared the defibrillator. Routine. That's what I told myself. Just another call. But then, as Mark pressed hard into the man's chest, I leaned close to secure the airway tube, and I swear I heard it. A whisper. Weak, raspy, but deliberate. Not yet. Don't let me go. I froze. His lips had moved. I was sure of it. Yet the monitor showed nothing. Flatline, pure as silence. No electrical activity, no pulse, no signs of life. My training screamed at me to focus on the protocol. But the whisper clung to me, colder than the storm outside, and a thought I had never dared to consider lodged in my chest. What if, for a moment, the dead could speak? I shook it off and barked for epinephrine, trying to bury the chill crawling up my spine. But deep down, I already knew. This was no ordinary call, and nothing in my career could have prepared me for what was about to unfold in that bedroom. The storm rattled the windows of the house as we worked, the sound of rain tapping against the glass blending with the rhythm of compressions. Mark's hands pumped steadily against the man's chest. Steady, precise, the way we'd practiced 1,000 times. I snapped the pads onto his bare skin, the adhesive pulling at gray chest hair, and hit analyze on the defibrillator. The machine confirmed what I already saw on the screen. A systole, flatline. The coldest word in emergency medicine. Epi-in, I said, pushing the syringe into the IV line I had threaded into his arm. The fluid disappeared into the vein as though the body still belonged to him, though by every definition we were already fighting a ghost. His wife hovered in the doorway, sobbing uncontrollably. Is he gone? Not yet, I answered without looking up. We're not stopping. I focused on the man lying beneath us. His name, I learned quickly from his wife, was Robert Miller, 55 years old. Worked as a mechanic at a local shop. No major medical history beyond mild hypertension. A hard-working man, father of 2 grown kids. Someone whose life had been ordinary until it suddenly wasn't. The details trickled in as I scanned the room for anything useful. Pill bottles on the nightstand, a half-finished glass of water, a family photo with Robert grinning at a barbecue. Everything about the scene screamed routine cardiac arrest. Middle-aged man, history of high blood pressure, collapse at home in the late evening. The kind of call we'd logged countless times. Yet the whisper still clung to me, replaying in my head like an echo I couldn't silence. Not yet. Don't let me go. I told myself it was just the storm, the creak of the old house, my mind playing tricks under pressure. But as Mark counted off compressions, I could have sworn Robert's lips trembled again, almost shaping words. Shock advised, the defibrillator finally announced, breaking through my thoughts. We cleared, delivered the jolt, and his body arched violently before slumping back to the floor. The monitor flickered, then returned to silence, still flat, still no pulse. We loaded Robert onto the stretcher, moving as fast as the narrow staircase allowed. His wife's cries followed us, her voice breaking as she begged us to save him. The storm outside had grown fiercer, thunder rolling as if mocking our fight against inevitability. In the back of the ambulance, Mark resumed compressions while I secured the airway and monitored vitals. The cabin smelled of antiseptic and sweat, filled with the mechanical rhythm of our efforts. Everything pointed to another routine loss. Another life claimed by the quiet cruelty of the heart. But in the hollow space between compressions, when the world seemed to pause, I swear I heard it again. Faint, desperate, undeniable. Please, don't let me die here. The back of the ambulance rattled as we sped through the slick streets, red lights flashing against the rain-smeared windows. Mark kept compression steady, sweat dripping down his forehead despite the cool air blowing through the vents. The monitor continued its relentless flatline, each beepless second hammering at my chest. Another round of epi, I said, drawing up the syringe with practiced speed. The plunger depressed smoothly, the medication sliding into Robert's vein. Still nothing. The radio crackled. ETA 5 minutes. Trauma bay prepped. Copy, I replied, though my eyes stayed fixed on the man in front of me. His skin was cool, his body limp. The kind of picture that usually meant we were only buying time for the family to say goodbye. Yet I couldn't shake the memory of his lips moving, the whispers cutting through the chaos. Twice now. 2 separate moments when he should have been nothing but silent. Pulse check, I called. Mark paused compressions while I pressed fingers to the carotid artery. Nothing. I checked the monitor again. Still a systole. We resumed compressions. When we pulled into the ambulance bay, a team was already waiting. ER nurses in blue scrubs, a resident in a white coat, respiratory therapist rolling in a vent. Their faces were calm, almost bored, like this was just another Tuesday night code. 55-year-old male witnessed arrest at home, I rattled off as we wheeled him inside. A systole on arrival. 3 rounds of epi, 1 shock. No ROSC. Airway secured, IV established. CPR ongoing. The ER resident nodded, already donning gloves. Let's get him into Bay 4, switch compressors, start another line. We transferred Robert onto the hospital bed, monitors snapping into place, the rhythm of compressions continuing without pause. The room filled with the familiar chaos of a code, syringes snapping open, orders being barked, the hiss of oxygen. I stepped back slightly, giving the hospital team space to work, but I stayed close enough to see Robert's face, to watch his lips. And then it happened again. As the new compressor leaned into his chest, Robert's mouth moved. This time, there was no mistaking it. I heard it clearly, the words breaking through the storm of voices around us. Look, behind you. I froze. My head snapped up instinctively, scanning the room. And just as my eyes shifted, one of the IV bags slipped from its pole, crashing to the floor in a spray of saline. The nurse cursed, quickly grabbing another to replace it. Coincidence. It had to be. But my stomach twisted, bile rising as the weight of the moment pressed down on me. Robert should not have been capable of speech. He should not have been capable of anything. Yet the impossible words hung in the air, daring me to believe. At first, I thought maybe I was losing it. Fatigue, stress, the adrenaline dump, it wouldn't be the first time exhaustion had played tricks on me. But as I stared at Robert's face, I knew I hadn't imagined it. Did you hear that? I muttered to Mark. He shook his head, focused on bagging the patient with smooth, mechanical precision. Hear what? I didn't answer. How could I explain? That a man in full cardiac arrest, with no pulse and no electrical activity, had just spoken. The ER resident leaned over the bed. Pupils fixed and dilated. Continue compressions. His voice was clipped, detached, the way you had to be in situations like this. But then something happened that snapped every head in the room toward the monitor. The flatline flickered. Not a full rhythm. Not even an organized electrical pattern. Just a strange, jagged spike that shouldn't have been there. It appeared for 2 seconds, then vanished. The resident frowned. Artifact. Check the leads. A nurse quickly adjusted the sticky pads, pressing them firmly against Robert's chest. Leads secure, doctor. We all turned back to the monitor. Flatline again. Then Robert's chest rose. Not from the bag valve mask, not from compressions, but on its own. A single, shallow breath. Wait, did he just... One of the nurses whispered. Impossible, the resident snapped. Continue CPR. But I was watching closely, too closely to dismiss it. His chest had definitely moved on its own, and then his lips parted again. Stop. The voice was faint, raspy, but real. I froze, glancing around to see if anyone else had heard it. Judging by the wide eyes of the respiratory therapist, I wasn't the only one. That's not possible, the resident barked, shaking his head. He has no pulse, no output. He can't talk, but Robert did. Don't let him in. The words came out broken, spaced between compressions, but they were unmistakable. Let who in? I whispered before I could stop myself. The room fell silent for a heartbeat too long. Everyone had heard it. Even the resident's mask of skepticism faltered. Then the monitor spiked again, this time longer, more defined. Not a rhythm we recognized, but something unnatural, almost like two signals layered over one another. The resident snapped back into control. Continue resuscitation. Push another round. Don't get distracted. But I was distracted. We all were. Because whatever was happening in that trauma bay wasn't in any medical textbook. The resident's voice cut through the tension. Epinephrine, now! A nurse pushed the syringe into Robert's IV line, her hands shaking just enough that I noticed. The room was tense, not just because of the code, but because everyone had heard it. Everyone had heard a man with no pulse speak. The monitor crackled again. This time, instead of a flatline, there was a chaotic flurry of signals, like the heart was trying to remember what beating felt like. V-fib, Mark muttered, glancing at the screen. But I knew it wasn't V-fib. I'd seen thousands of strips, and nothing looked like this. It was almost patterned, too deliberate to be noise, too unnatural to be anything we could treat. Then Robert's eyes snapped open. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the crash cart. His pupils were blown, his skin ashen, but his gaze locked onto me with terrifying clarity. You... no, he rasped, lips barely moving. I froze, unable to breathe. What do you mean? His head tilted slightly, as if he was listening to something none of us could hear. Then, with a hoarse whisper, he's here. The overhead lights flickered. Just once. Just enough to make the room feel colder. Stop CPR, Robert gasped suddenly. His voice was louder now, stronger. It doesn't matter. The resident snapped. Keep compressions going. He's hypoxic. He's not making sense. But what chilled me wasn't that Robert was speaking. It was what he said next. Dr. Walsh, don't open that door. Every head turned toward the trauma bay doors. They were closed, but the timing was too precise to ignore. Walsh was the attending on duty that night, and he had just stepped into the anteroom, reaching for the handle. I felt goosebumps ripple across my arms. How could Robert know that? His body was strapped to a gurney, his head tilted away from the entrance. The resident barked, "Defib, charge to 300. The paddles were placed, gel smeared across Robert's chest. His body arched as the shock coursed through him. The monitor beeped, flatlined again, then spiked with the same unnatural rhythm, and then Robert laughed. It was low, guttural, nothing like the voice we'd heard before. His lips curled into the faintest grin, and for one horrifying second, I swore his voice wasn't his alone. Too late. The trauma bay doors swung open, and Dr. Walsh stepped inside. The monitors shrieked in alarm. Robert's vitals plummeted into chaos. The overhead lights dimmed and came back brighter than before, leaving every face in that room pale with fear. This wasn't resuscitation anymore. This was something else. Something medicine couldn't explain. And I knew, with a sick certainty, that whatever was happening wasn't done yet. The trauma bay had gone dead quiet except for the shrill alarms. Even the resident, usually so unshakable, looked rattled. "Check the equipment!" he barked, his voice tighter than before. Two nurses scrambled to confirm the defibrillator, the monitors, the IV pumps. Mark leaned closer to the pads on Robert's chest, making sure the leads hadn't slipped. Every device read perfectly normal. No malfunctions. No reason for what we were seeing. "Doctor, everything's functioning," one of the nurses stammered. "It's not the equipment." Robert's eyes fluttered open again, and his lips parted. His voice was calm this time, almost conversational. "Room 3, he said, his gaze fixed toward the far corner of the ER. "The little boy, he's going to code." The resident frowned. "Ignore it. Continue compressions." But less than 30 seconds later, the overhead speaker crackled. "Code blue, ER room 3. Every head in our bay snapped toward the sound. A nurse swore under her breath. Someone muttered a prayer. That's just coincidence," the resident insisted, though his voice lacked conviction. But Robert wasn't finished. "The woman upstairs," he whispered. "7th floor. Her lungs are filling with blood. You won't reach her in time." I felt my stomach twist. Upstairs, on the 7th floor, was the cardiac step-down unit. The charge nurse darted toward the phone. She was pale, shaking, but she still asked for a status check. Seconds later, she slammed the receiver back into its cradle. Her voice trembled as she turned to us. "They just called a rapid response on 7. A GI bleed into the lungs." The room fell into an eerie stillness. We weren't just dealing with random words from a dying man. Robert was describing hospital events as they happened. The resident looked around, visibly rattled now. No, this isn't possible. He's hypoxic. He's incoherent." But I couldn't take my eyes off Robert. He turned his head toward me, his stare hollow but focused. "You've been carrying the weight too long," he rasped. "Your father's heart. The letter you never opened." The words hit me like a gut punch. My chest went cold. He couldn't possibly know. I hadn't told anyone at work about my father's bypass surgery last year, or the unopened letter I kept in my locker. Mark's gloved hand clamped onto my shoulder. His eyes searched mine, silently asking the question I was too afraid to say out loud. How does he know? The monitors spiked again, then steadied. Robert's voice dropped lower, almost a whisper, but it carried through the entire room. "You think you're saving me, but you're not. You're keeping the door open." For the first time in my career, I realized I was more afraid of what we might unleash than of losing the patient in front of me. I'd been on dozens of resuscitations over the years, some messy, some miraculous, some heartbreaking. But nothing prepared me for what came next. Robert's body convulsed, not from compressions or defibrillation, but with a sudden violent shudder that rattled the gurney. His eyes rolled back, then snapped forward, locking on Dr. Walsh, who had just stepped into the bay. "You're too late!" Robert hissed, his voice layered, like two people speaking through one throat. The resident flinched. "Dr. Walsh, should we—" But Robert cut him off, his voice sharper now, deliberate. "Check the basement freezer." The words hung in the air like poison. Walsh froze, his face drained of color. "What did you just say?" Robert's lips curled into the faintest smile. "You left it there. 3 years ago. No one else knows." The room went silent. Every nurse, every tech, every physician stood frozen, their eyes darting between Robert and Walsh. "Impossible," Walsh whispered under his breath. "There's no way." But his expression betrayed him. He knew something. "Doctor?" I said cautiously, my voice cracking. What is he talking about?" Walsh didn't answer. His jaw clenched, his hands curling into fists at his sides. Robert's chest heaved as another unnatural rhythm spiked across the monitor. He groaned, then spoke again, louder this time, his voice echoing against the tile walls. "They'll find her if you don't move her. The freezer won't stay hidden forever." The charge nurse gasped, covering her mouth with a trembling hand. "Dr. Walsh," the resident pressed, his voice unsteady. "Is there—" "Shut it down," Walsh barked suddenly, his composure gone. "Stop compressions. Stop everything. This patient is gone." "No, he's not," I blurted, shaking my head. He's talking. He's telling us things." "That's not possible," Walsh snapped. but his eyes were wide, panicked. "He's not conscious. He's not alive." Robert's voice cut through his denial like a blade. "She remembers your hands, doctor. She remembers the cold." Walsh staggered back a step, his face ghostly pale. For the first time in my career, I saw a seasoned physician look haunted. And in that moment, something shifted in the room. Every rational explanation collapsed. This wasn't hypoxia. This wasn't delirium. This was a revelation so specific, so damning, that none of us could dismiss it. The monitors screamed with another spike, the waveform jagged and unnatural, like interference on an old radio. The lights above flickered again, dimming for just a second before humming back to life. And then, Robert whispered one last phrase that sent a chill deep into my bones. "You brought this here, doctor. And now we all pay." The air in the trauma bay felt heavier, charged, as if something unseen had entered with those words. And I knew, we all knew, whatever was happening had crossed into territory medicine could never explain. The trauma bay descended into chaos, but it wasn't the organized chaos of a code. This was different. It felt wrong. Robert's body arched violently on the gurney, every muscle taut as if pulled by invisible strings. The monitor went haywire, not with rhythms we could name, but with jagged signals that looked almost like symbols. None of us had ever seen anything like it. "Charge again! 300!" the resident shouted, desperate to regain control. The defib paddles were placed, gel smeared hastily. His body jolted with the shock, but instead of settling into a recognizable rhythm, the monitor emitted a low, grinding tone that vibrated in the air. I felt the sound in my chest more than I heard it. And then Robert's eyes shot open again. His voice, deeper, layered, unnatural, poured out of him like it belonged to someone else. "You can't silence me." The words weren't directed at us. They were aimed straight at Dr. Walsh. The attending physician staggered back, his hands trembling. "This is nonsense. He's gone. He's gone." But Robert's head turned toward him, slow and deliberate. "You left her in the dark, doctor. But she's not alone anymore." The overhead lights flickered violently, plunging us into momentary shadow. Nurses screamed, one dropping a tray of instruments that clattered across the tile floor. "Somebody cut power to this room," Walsh yelled, panic cracking his voice. "No," Mark said quietly beside me, his voice almost a whisper. "This isn't the power." Robert's body convulsed again, but this time his arm jerked upward, straining against the restraints. His hand stretched toward Walsh, fingers curled like claws. "He knows," Robert rasped, his voice breaking into a guttural growl. "They all know now." The monitors blared with overlapping alarms. His heart rate wasn't a number anymore. It was a blur, an unreadable mess. The pulse ox beeped erratically, red numbers flashing nonsense. I glanced at the team. Every face reflected the same thing. Fear. Not the fear of losing a patient, but the fear of being in the presence of something unnatural. "Dr. Walsh," I muttered, my throat dry. "What is he talking about?" Walsh didn't answer. He couldn't. His silence said more than words ever could. And then, just when the tension reached a breaking point, Robert's body slammed back against the gurney with such force the frame shook. His chest heaved, his eyes rolled back, and a final, guttural sound escaped his throat. Half scream, half laugh. Then silence. The monitor flatlined. Everyone froze. Even the alarm seemed muted. For a moment, all I could hear was the hiss of the oxygen line and the thundering of my own heart. And in that silence, one thought gnawed at me. Whatever had just passed through Robert, it wasn't gone. It had left its mark on all of us. The silence after that final convulsion felt heavier than the chaos that had filled the room moments before. We all stood frozen, staring at the flatline on the monitor as if waiting for it to explain what had just happened. The resident cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "Time of death, 22:47. But even as he said it, no one moved. Not a single nurse, not the respiratory therapist, not Mark. We all knew Robert had already spoken beyond the limits of death. Declaring a time felt almost meaningless. I forced myself to check for a pulse one last time, pressing 2 fingers into his neck. Nothing. His skin was already cooling beneath the fluorescent lights. "Let's clean up," the resident muttered, trying to regain a sense of control. "Get the body ready for transport." Nurses began to move, but their hands were shaky, their eyes downcast. One of them crossed herself before pulling the sheet up to Robert's chin. I stepped back, my chest tight. Something inside me screamed that this wasn't over. And then, without warning, the monitor beeped. We all whipped our heads toward the screen. The flatline broke, just for a second, with a faint rhythm, a single blip, then another. "No," the resident whispered, his face pale. "That's not possible." The monitor lit up again, weak but undeniable. Robert's heart was beating, slowly, erratically, but beating. "Get compressions going again," Mark shouted, already positioning his hands. The team jumped back into motion, but before anyone touched him, Robert's chest rose on its own. A shallow inhale, then another. The resident's jaw dropped. He's breathing." We watched as Robert's color began to return, faint pink pushing against the gray of his skin. The monitor now showed a rhythm, weak, irregular, but stable enough to be real. But when his eyelids fluttered, I knew something had changed. His eyes opened, unfocused at first, then settling into the vacant confusion of someone just emerging from a deep fog. "Where am I?" he croaked, voice raw. The room erupted in disbelief. The same man who had whispered impossible truths just minutes ago was now blinking at us like a typical post-resuscitation patient. "You're in the ER, Robert," I said softly, though my own voice trembled. "You had a cardiac arrest." His brow furrowed, but not with recognition. "I don't remember anything. Just darkness." Then I woke up. I exchanged a glance with Mark. He gave the slightest shake of his head, silently confirming what I already knew. Robert remembered nothing. Nothing of what had passed his lips. Nothing of the warnings. Nothing of Dr. Walsh. As nurses secured his lines and prepped him for ICU transfer, the air in the trauma bay remained thick with unease. The patient had come back, but the questions he left behind would haunt us far longer. Robert was transferred to the cardiac ICU within the hour. His vitals stabilized overnight, though his body was weak from the prolonged arrest. The medical chart listed his recovery as remarkable, but none of us in that trauma bay could look at it without remembering what we had heard. The next morning, I visited his room. He lay propped up on pillows, pale but alert, a nasal cannula feeding him oxygen. When his eyes met mine, I braced for some flicker of recognition, for him to recall the words that had left us all shaken. But instead, he gave me a tired smile. "Thanks for saving me." I hesitated before asking, "Do you remember anything from last night? Anything at all?" Robert frowned, thinking, "Just pain in my chest, then nothing, like flipping a switch." Then I woke up here. I pressed further. "Do you remember speaking? Or seeing things? Maybe voices?" His confusion deepened. "No." Was I awake? I thought I was out cold. To test him, I pulled a chart from the foot of his bed and pointed to a diagram of the heart. "Do you know what this is?" He chuckled weakly. "My ticker. That's about all I know. I'm a mechanic, not a doctor." That was all the confirmation I needed. Robert had no medical knowledge, no memory of the chilling statements he'd made, no awareness of the things he'd revealed about other patients, or about Walsh. Later that week, the team held a debrief. Equipment logs were reviewed line by line. The defibrillator had worked perfectly. The cardiac monitor showed no errors. Every medication had been drawn, labeled, and administered correctly. Nothing explained what we had witnessed. I even checked with the charge nurse about the 7th floor patient. She had indeed bled into her lungs that night. She had survived, but only because a rapid response team reached her in time. Robert had described it before anyone called the code. As for room 3, the little boy had coded and was resuscitated successfully. Again, Robert had spoken of it first. And then there was Walsh. He avoided questions, brushing off Robert's words as nonsense from a dying brain. But I saw the way his hands shook. I saw how he left meetings early, how he avoided eye contact whenever someone mentioned the basement storage. For my own peace of mind, I did something I wasn't proud of. I asked a friend in hospital security to check the basement freezers, officially for a supply audit. He told me later they were all in order. Nothing unusual. But I couldn't shake the way he hesitated before adding, "At least, nothing we're allowed to report." That night, as I left the hospital, the air outside felt different. Lighter somehow, but charged. I couldn't escape the thought that Robert's words had pulled something hidden into the open, something we weren't ready to face. It has been months since that night, but the memory refuses to fade. I have responded to dozens of calls since then. Car wrecks, overdoses, strokes, the ordinary tragedies of emergency medicine. But nothing has ever left me with the same chill. I keep asking myself, what did we really witness? Was Robert's brain misfiring from lack of oxygen, producing fragments of medical jargon and impossible visions? Or was something deeper at work? Something that defies every textbook and training manual I have ever trusted. Medicine teaches us to rely on numbers, blood pressure, oxygen saturation, heart rate. But that night, the numbers told one story, while Robert's words told another. He was supposed to be unconscious, drifting on the edge of death. Instead, he spoke with precision, with knowledge he should not have had, describing events unfolding in real time beyond the walls of our trauma bay. And then there was the other thing, the secret. His words cut through the room like a scalpel. "You're hiding her in the basement freezer." I tell myself it was nonsense, a coincidence, a meaningless utterance from a man whose brain was shutting down. But in the silence that followed, I saw my colleagues' faces. And I saw Walsh's, the way his jaw tightened, the way he looked down at the floor instead of meeting anyone's eyes. Since that night, I've avoided asking more questions. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe it makes me practical. In this line of work, you learn that some doors are better left closed. Still, when I lie awake at night replaying the scene, I hear Robert's voice again. Calm, certain, speaking from somewhere none of us could reach. His words remind me that life and death may not be the clean boundary we think it is, that maybe consciousness lingers, stretches, or travels in ways we cannot measure. I also wonder how many other patients have spoken truths no one wanted to hear. How many dying breaths were dismissed as delirium when, in fact, they carried fragments of something real. Emergency medicine is about saving lives, but sometimes, in those moments between breaths, we glimpse something larger than the body on the gurney. Something that hints at the mysteries of what it means to be alive and what it means to leave. I keep working, keep answering calls, keep doing the job I swore to do. But in the back of my mind, one question always lingers. If Robert could see beyond his failing body, if he could reach into secrets buried in this hospital, then what else is hidden in the thin veil between life and death? That night taught me that the scariest moments aren't always about blood or broken bones. Sometimes, the most terrifying thing is realizing that the universe might be listening and speaking through the people we thought could no longer speak at all. And that thought still haunts me more than anything I've ever faced on the job.